383, you've served your purpose well. You did everything you were told to do for many decades. You pushed the Monaco along without issue or complaint, but it's off to greener pastures for you, for now. Because I won't forget all the good times that we had in the past and all the happy memories we have. But there's a new girl in town, and her name is 400. So your old car needs an engine, but you only have a few $100 to make it happen. You got a car show next weekend that you want to attend? What do? I'm going to show you. Today we'll be working on this $500 Mopar 400 big block for my 1965 Dodge Monaco. Now I was told it was low miles, but is that true? If it is, how much does it cost to have this engine ready to drop in? Stick around to the end of the video to find out. Now the 383 is not done. We're going to save it for a later date, just hang on to it. But I want to use the car. I want to drive it now, and the easiest way to do that is to throw a little bit of extra money at this thing. Now this is a 400 out of a late 70s Cordoba, and it's all there. It's pretty low miles, it's complete, and it's got a lot of good parts on it already. It's very clean on the inside. I took the cap off the valve cover here, and you can see there's basically zero buildup or sludge. So it's already a good bit ahead of our original 383. And it's going to be easy to make this kind of a budget, fun driver car and use it for what it's intended to be, a driver, a good car to enjoy and haul people around in. Now the thing about this engine is that, yes, it is a late 70s smogger era big block. It's not the powerhouse that the original 383 used to be, but it's okay. We can definitely do some things to wake it up. Now what this engine has on it is some things that we don't want that we're going to dive into here later, but it's got a lean burn ignition system. This is all lean burn garbage here. This entire harness is lean burn. This is when emissions were really heavily influencing car manufacturers. So the big block was basically dying out. This is the late 70s. I mean, the last year for the big block was a 78. So I'll have to see what the casting data is on this one, but you can kind of tell all these electronics and vacuum hoses and actuators they have to incorporate just to meet standards for the time. But we're going to get rid of all that. Now we do have the mighty thermoquad up top, but again, it's got all sorts of emissions mumbo jumbo on it that we don't care about. So we may use it, we may not, but we have all sorts of good parts here, stuff ready to go. But before we even tear into this thing, I've got the pressure washer sitting over there, a couple cans of degreaser. We're going to clean it up and just kind of get a baseline and see exactly what we have here, so it's a lot easier to work on for sure. I got some Lucas Oil parts cleaner and degreaser. I don't know if this is any good, but I'm going to try it. I know typically everybody uses gunk, but I just saw this on the shelf and it kind of interested me. So let's spray it on the transmission here and just see, does it do anything much? Oh, that transmission dipstick probably leaked. The pan itself probably leaked. Shifter seal probably leaked. But it's nowhere near as bad as what the old transmission looked like, I'll tell you that much. good? I got some right here.
That was very satisfying. It just fell off.
Now you're probably wondering, why am I not using the original engine? Well, I'm cheap, and because of this. Check out how clean it is underneath the valve cover. Now if you remember just a few short videos ago, we pulled the valve cover off of the original engine and you couldn't hardly see any of this. Now there is a little bit of buildup right here in the corners, but nowhere near compared to the amount that was in the original 383. So that's why we're using this engine. It's a good low mile setup. We're going to pull the rest of it apart and just kind of see how it looks. Check out the cam, check out the wear on the pistons, but this looks way, way better. We've got the intake and the valve covers off and all the front end torn apart. I gotta say, this thing is very clean underneath. Hardly any sludge built up. The cam's got some wear to it, but hardly really any, you know, for a 40, 50-year-old engine, it's not that bad. Underneath both valve covers looks the same, nice and clean, not hardly any buildup. What we're gonna do is go ahead, pull the rocker arm assembly, exhaust manifolds, get all the push rods out, and then we'll start working on getting the heads off, and then we'll pull the front cover off so we can pull the cam and the timing chain. Come on. Do you just get charged an overdraft fee and have a slow app for a banking account? Wait, how did you? I'm exactly you, just better looking. What? Besides that, have you heard of Albert? Oh, you mean like Albert Einstein? No. Oh, Albert Brooks? No. Albert Prince Consort? No. Albert II, Prince of Monaco? Yeah, no. Prince Albert in a can? Who? Well, you better go let him out. Wait. No, I'm talking about this Albert. Albert's free to sign up for and it's super easy to use. If you're ever in a pinch and you need money, they will forward you up to $250 before your paycheck even comes in. All you gotta do is pay them back when it's ready. They never charge any overdraft fees if you ever have an accident like you just did. And on top of that, you can get cash back rewards up to like 5 to 20% depending on the place. Now, since you obviously suck at managing money, Albert has a fix for that. It's called Genius. It's a group of financial experts who are at the ready to help you whenever you need them to offer any kind of advice on a financial decision. All you gotta do is send them a message and they will help out and offer some advice. Now, just for a limited time though, Albert is offering a special deal. If you open up an account and connect a qualifying direct deposit, they'll give you $150. Wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much for telling me about this. I appreciate it. Supporting Albert means that you are supporting my channel. So click the link in the description box or go to albert.com/DylanMcCool to download the Albert app today. That's albert.com/DylanMcCool. And the last one, well, besides the rear. Ooh, that's bad. That's completely blocked off. If we drove this thing or tried to run it without pulling these out and doing a head gasket, it'd been bad. I mean, it's a low mile engine, but somebody just didn't take care of it in that short amount of time. They at least changed the oil, but probably had a good radiator leak or this thing's been sitting for a while and they just didn't do a good job. That's okay. We're here to fix that. That's why we do what we do. Even if they look low mile, and they are low mile, they can still have a lot of nastiness inside. So we can actually take some casting numbers here and see what we have for a block. So right here, this tells us the cubic inches. You can see it is a 400 and it was built in, was that 77? So we have a 77 400. Again, late model, big block. I mean, this is basically the last year. Well, they had one more year in 78, so it's basically done at this point, but it's a low compression, low power, but we have stuff to fix that. We're gonna make it a little bit nicer, but our main goal with this whole Monaco is to be a nice street cruiser with a little bit of low end torque and grunt out of this nice little big block. There it goes. There's that lifter I dropped. Well, the bottom end looks pretty clean. I mean, nothing crazy build up. I mean, it looks like a nice low mile engine. Again, the pickup on the screen here looks pretty nice still, so we can reuse that, clean it out. I mean, this thing has a cast crank in comparison to like a forged crank that was in the original engine, but we're not worried about that. We want to have a nice cruiser, and we've got some parts to go back in here that I'm going to show you here in just a second. But the main thing we did all this for was to, one, change the oil pan gasket, and to two, change out the rear main seal because it looks like it was leaking. There we go. Back in the day, they used a rope style seal, which works until the rope loses its pliability and turns into basically a solid. So getting that out of there is not going to be fun, especially when it's on the underside of the crank here. We're going to have to do some maneuvering to get that out of there. This is how involved it is just to change the rear main seal from the original one, which, you know, I could have undone each of the pistons, popped them out, and then done that. But I mean, whenever you have such a low mileage engine, you don't really want to interfere with certain things. So I'm going to try and leave it alone as much as I can. Oh man, that looks great. Hold on, let me get a... McCool Auto t-shirts also double as shop rags. That's a brand new bearing right there, y'all. It's got just barely a little bit of wear. That's going to go perfectly right back in place. Oh yeah, absolutely perfect. Again, a little bit of wear, but we're not showing any signs of high mileage. That's a really good sign right there. Beautiful. Beautiful. A little more wear on this one, but still, again, not a whole lot. Good enough to put it back together and to go. It's great. A little wear, not a whole lot though. That one looks good too. A little oil on it, but you can see it's nice and clean. One complete rear main seal out. That was so much nicer than what it was the last time I did this. You can see it's just rope. I mean, that's all it is. Look how when I pushed on this end with a screwdriver, it's just a frayed end. But if you try to push on it, it just falls apart. I mean, there's no leverage or anything that you can do. You basically have to do what I did. If you aren't going to pull the whole bottom end out, you pretty much got to do this. So it sucks. It's a lot of work. It's kind of hack. But it's done, and we've got a brand new rear main seal to go back into its place. Now the biggest reason that we're doing all of this is to replace it with these two-piece rear main seal that's made out of rubber. And the reason that we do that is, well, it's a lot easier to replace, but it's also a lot easier to mess up. And the reason that it is easy to mess up is because there's actually an edge that you can put these in backwards. Now the reason that you want to get this edge right is because oil pressure is going to push against that whenever you wind up the engine, and that's actually going to close the seal even more. So if we don't put it in right, we can mess it up. But we're going to do it to where this tiny, basically, edge right here is pushing outwards. So if pressure is building up, it'll push against this, this little seal right here. Now something that also will help is to clock this, because you don't want to put your seal mating surfaces, like where the two halves meet, right on the exact same spot where the cap meets, because if you do, that can actually create a leak in itself. So if you clock it and do it to where one seal goes past and the other one goes inside here, you have your halves splitting right here instead of perfectly right in the center. Because if anywhere is going to leak, it's going to be right here at these halves. So instead of putting it, straight up and down, clock it a little bit, and that'll prevent hopefully a little bit more future leaks if you can.
One, two, three. One, two, three.
Well, the bottom side of the engine really didn't get a whole lot of cleaning when we did it earlier, and there were, motor mounts, the starter was in the way. We got all the coolant passages open, knocked all the freeze plugs out, so I just wanted to go through and clean everything the best that I can for whenever we paint it. Just wanted to make a nice, clean surface. I know we did it earlier, but there's just things that we couldn't get to because there was junk all over it. Now that we have the engine back inside after pressure washing all the gunk off of it, I figured now would be a good time to go ahead and install the camshaft while the rest of the stuff dries. So what we have here is a Summit Racing brand camshaft. It is part number SUM-K6400. Now the K means that it is a kit. It comes with a camshaft and a set of lifters combined. Now I've got the lifters over there sitting in some oil to kind of bleed it and get all the air out and go ahead and prime them for the break-in procedure. But the specs on this thing are very good. It's a very good low-end torquey cam. It's probably equivalent to maybe around like a HP 440 of the time, while this one basically had a broomstick cam from the factory. So it'll give it a little bit extra grunt. Now I've used these cams before. I had a similar cam in my Mustang and I absolutely love that thing. But this one's supposed to be really good for high vacuum, used with a low compression engine, factory gears, factory stall converter. So it's a good setup. Now what we have to do here is use some of this Moroso Moly paste because this is going to stick to the lobes and actually help with the break-in procedure because this is a flat tappet cam. We have lifters rolling against each of these lobes, so if one of them burns up on the break-in procedure, that means we got to pull it all back apart and do it all over again. But I want to read the specs to you here. On the advertised duration, it's a split duration cam, split pattern, so the advertised duration is 288 on the intake side, and the exhaust is 298. At 50, the duration on the intake side is 214. At 50 on the exhaust side, 224. So again, not a really radical cam. On the intake side for lift with a 1.5 factory rocker arm ratio, it's 444 and exhaust is a 466. So going to be a good torque powerhouse cam and work with our factory power brakes. So that's really what we want. And again, it's like super budget. This thing only costs $155 for the cam and the lifter set combined. I mean, that's cheap. And they're good cams. They're really good quality. We've also got a double roller timing chain we'll throw in here with the whole kit and get everything buttoned up. And then this is the key to start the rebuild process. At that point, we can put the heads on the timing cover, intake, oil pan, all that, and go back the opposite direction than what we've been doing all day long. So let's get this Moroso Moly paste on here and pop the cam in. Add a dollop on each single lobe. We're just going to go about halfway so we have something to grab onto. And once we get the cam about halfway in, then we can go back, add it to the rest. Now as we install this, just take your time. We don't want to nick a cam bearing and hurt it. So if you got to, just kind of walk it in, rotate it if you have to. Sometimes you got to kind of pick it up in certain areas and sometimes you don't. Just kind of walk it in there and eventually it'll hit the backside. Just a little extra to each of the lobes, just to be on the safe side. Last thing I want is one of these wiping out. Now the first time you change your oil, you're probably going to notice some of this moly paste in the pan. That's okay, so don't sweat it. It's normal, but you do want to change your oil, you know, after you do the break-in procedure, maybe drive it around a little bit, and then change it back out. See how it's stuck a little bit? If you just rotate it, bring it around, it'll start to work its way in. Rotate it a little. And there it is. Now is the time to install the lifters. Now something that we like to do around here at least is to pre-soak the lifters, put them in some oil to get all of the air out of them and already prime them. You can see there's some air bubbles already starting to come up at the top. They've been sitting for a few hours. It's probably good, at least for a few hours or overnight if you can. It just basically fills up the lifter with oil. I do it that way. I know it's kind of up for debate whether you should or not, but I think it's a good idea. And we will prime the engine before we start it. I'll show you how to do that later in another video. But again, that's just what I like to do. So I just take and pull the lifter out. Now, this moly paste doesn't really like to stick to stuff that has oil on it. Just on the surface of the lifter itself, I will take a rag here, wipe it off, kind of get it dry. Take a little bit of this moly paste, put it on the bottom of the lifter. there's any that got knocked off whenever you put the cam in, maybe for a cam bearing or something, whatever the case may be, this will add a little bit extra protection to it, and you just drop it into place. And there we go. The forbidden syrup. Now that we have the cam and the timing chain on, we can put the timing cover in, but we have to clean up the gasket surfaces first. You can see there's a lot of the old material left where the old one was and where it came off. So we got to clean all that up. Not a big deal, so we'll just take and scrape all this away and get it cleaned up. And once we do that, that means that we can start putting things back together, including putting the heads back on and the valve covers, which you saw us clean up earlier. And then we can actually paint this thing, and it's going to be beautiful once it's ready. So I've got the timing cover gasket here, and this comes from a Felpro engine gasket kit. But what I'm doing is taking this whole setup here and just running a little bit of this ultra black RTV on both sides in a real thin coat. You don't need a whole lot because you don't want to push it past the gasket into like an oil passage or a coolant passage. But it's a really good idea to do this because it'll fill in the gaps. Like if there's like any kind of pitting on a surface area that's machined, that little bit of RTV will help in kind of, fill those gaps in. You don't necessarily have to do this, but it's just a little bit of extra insurance so you don't have something leak. We do stuff like the timing cover, intake gaskets, the oil pan gasket, do stuff like this because, just a little bit of RTV can go a very long way. The valve covers on this car are pretty nasty. They look okay though. They're not dented or rusted up. Just a little bit of surface rust that we can get rid of and a little bit of grease. So we'll take and clean up these both because I really like the way these valve covers are shaped. The factory ones is really cool, and they have provisions over on the back side there for the wire loom. So I want to reuse these. All we have to do though is just clean them up and make them look a little bit nicer than what they do. Look at that before and after. Wild how just a little bit of elbow grease can go a long way. And all the money that I spent on this was a little bit of time and a couple of those little grinding pads, and it looks a lot better. Now we do need to do a little detail work like in and around here. I'll do all that by hand, but the majority of the paint's gone. And you can see just how nice this is going to look and how the paint's really going to stick a lot better to this than it is this. Got our new head gaskets here, and this also came from that same Felpro kit. And before we did all this, we made sure that the deck surface on the block was clean, and we took the surface on the heads as well to make sure they were clean on top of that. So now we can actually take the cylinder head and finally put it in place. And now the other cylinder head. Starting to shape up, look like an engine again. Get our push rods chilling out in the lifters, pop them into place. These are just the original push rods because, again, this is not a radical cam. So since it's pretty close to a factory 440 HP cam, push rods are basically right. And again, we're going for budget here, so we don't want to throw a ton of money at custom push rods, which probably would be the right option, but hey, we're going with what we have. And now the rocker assembly, which is probably one of Chrysler's coolest features that they had. All bolts on, makes it very easy to get your rockers back exactly where they need to go. Now, unfortunately, there is a bit of a downside to this rocker shaft system. Now, it's not because of Chrysler's fault in this sense. It's just because of, well, one, they're only good for hydraulic flat tappet cams because they're not adjustable. As you can see, it's just a stamped steel rocker. There's no adjustability in any of it. It's good for, again, a hydraulic system, and they can really work for some fairly radical cams in a hydraulic cam. And it's not a bad system for that. Now, the thing about it is that a lot of people don't know how to install these. I've actually had a set break. What happens is somebody will go down the line and just install them like that. Tighten this one all the way down, and this one left has no pressure on it at all. These valve springs, they have a lot of pressure on them, and they have to put pressure on that and the lifters themselves. It takes a lot to move these. So if you do this, you go in the center, work your way out. Once you get a little pressure, go to the next one and then tighten it down. You do that a few times, and you'll get to the point where the rocker system is completely installed. And then whenever you get all the way down and all of them are snug, then you torque your bolts. Like I said, I had a truck that was just like this. They had installed it over here. It broke on this bolt line, and it still ran somehow. It ran great, but it rattled like crazy. It sounded like something was coming apart, because it literally was. And whenever I pulled this valve cover and pulled the rocker assembly off, it came off in two pieces. That wasn't good. It wasn't a good thing. But the good thing about it is that I was able to take one off of another small block engine and drop it right in place. So that's another good thing, at least for these, is that you can just take one off and drop another one in. So again, it'll be great for our very mild hydraulic flat tappet cam. And again, you follow that same exact sequence and you won't have any issues whatsoever. It's not a whole lot of pressure on these. There's only 25 foot-pounds. And once everything is installed, we can rotate the engine over and just make sure nothing is binding up. Oh, we've got compression now. Listen to that. There we go. Looks like everything's working. Oh yeah, there we go. Loosening up some stuff that hadn't been moved in a minute. Uh-oh. I'll show you now why it is important to check things and rotate them around when you install parts. I messed up And how I messed up was I had all the push rods where they needed to be. Everything was installed correctly. It was sitting in the cup of the lifter, except I missed one. See how it just barely missed where the push rod is supposed to seat inside the rocker? Yeah, well, when I did that, I spun it over, it bent the push rod. So we have to take all this back apart and see if I can find another one. I should have a spare, but it just goes to show you that, hey, I mess up sometimes. I'm not perfect, and mistakes happen. But everything else looked like it installed properly, so we're going to pop this back off, replace that push rod, and continue on. The oil pan on. Looks good. Let's bolt it on. Now we've made it to the most important and crucial element of the budget rebuild. That's the paint. I have the engine together, I've taped off everything, masked off what I don't want to get paint on it, and we are ready to see some beautiful color finally go to this 400. Now the goal is to make this stuff last. We want to make sure that our paint sticks and looks good. So step one of that, which I've already done, is to clean everything, as in degreaser. Make sure that there's no oil buildup or dirt in any kind of these small crevices around in here. You know, you can use like brake cleaner, degreaser. As soon as your rag comes back clean, when you wipe something down, you're good to go. Step two, primer. Now, I have seen people not use primer on their engine paint, and over like a year or so, the paint, whenever it heats up and cools off, it'll start to pull away from the engine. It'll crack and flake off and then just eventually fall off. So primer is very important to make sure that the paint sticks, because this is bare metal. I mean, all this is cast iron. It may not be very obvious, but this needs to go on first so that way the paint can stick. The fun part is a very high quality paint. This is a Mopar brand, which there's multiple brands you can use like Duplicolor, but this is turquoise, Chrysler turquoise. It's got a bit of a green tint to it. And this is what the original 383 in the Monaco would have looked like. I had some left over from when I did my 69 Charger. So this is perfect for this car. Now, it's not the original paint for the 400 when it was in a Cordoba, but whenever you paint it, nobody's going to be able to tell the difference. It'll look the part and look really cool sitting in between the fenders of the Monaco. Well, I hate to brag, but man, does this engine look amazing after getting that last bit of paint on it. Now, a few things to note here. I didn't do the water pump housing, the water pump, and the intake in turquoise, and that's only because I ran out of paint. So I had to buy some more turquoise paint. That's on the way. We'll do that in the next video. And I typically like to clear coat my stuff too whenever I do it. So when we get everything together, get the intake bolted on, get the water pump housing and everything, we'll clear coat everything that's turquoise and then do like pulleys and stuff like that in a nice black coat, and that'll look really good. But that paint really does shine. It looks really nice. I mean, you saw how these valve covers look when we started. That was real. I really want to spend a lot of time on these just because that's like the attention getter right there. I mean, they're not perfect, but compared to what they looked like before, That's a big upgrade, a really big plus. So I'm very happy with that, very excited to see how it looks, and I can't wait to get everything bolted on and finalized. Well, you're probably wondering, why did I not rebuild the engine completely? And why didn't I use the 383? Well, it's because I want to drive the car and enjoy it. But I also wanted to show you guys that you can have a lot of fun and not spend a whole lot of money. And that's exactly what we did right here. All in all, I have only spent $374.72 to get this engine ready to go and put in the Monaco. That also includes some things that you haven't even seen yet, like the new fuel pump. Also has some freeze plugs, some intake gaskets, and all that good stuff. So there's still some more parts to install, but all in all, we did not spend a lot of money to make this thing go. Yeah, it has some wear in it. Yeah, it's got some miles on it, but it still has a lot of miles left in it. And we did just the bare minimum to get this thing back on the road and back in the Monaco. Now we can rebuild the 383 later, but we can still use some parts that we used here today, like the cam, the lifters, the timing gears, just throw a new timing chain on it. All that could go in the new 383 when we rebuild that. But you don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to have fun. That's what we want to do here. Have a lot of fun. I mean, we didn't spend $500 to get this thing ready. I mean, it was cheap. And the work was fun. You can do this over a couple weekends whenever you have the time available, because that's exactly what I did. What you see here is what you can do. You can go out there, tear an engine apart, put it back together, and take your time and be meticulous about it and have fun, but not spend a lot of money while you do it. And if you liked the video, while you're here, go ahead and throw a like down below. It really does mean a lot when you guys do that. It helps me out, it helps the channel out, as well as if you subscribe, turn on the notifications so you don't miss any more videos like this. And if you don't mind, buy a t-shirt, buy a sticker, because that directly helps out building these cars, putting them back on the road, just like what you see right here. And on top of that, if you don't care, check out Albert. They sponsored today's video, and they would greatly appreciate it if you would go check out their website. It means a lot to me because it helps out the channel. So thank you guys so much for your support. Thank you for sticking around for all this time. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one.